They said peace was bought with blood, but in the ashes of that war, beneath rain-soaked banners and shattered thrones, a debt remained unpaid, a daughter, not a coin, a life, not a number, sold as payment for war, bound to a rival Alpha. She was no warrior, no queen, just a girl marked as a sacrifice, and he, Kaelin, was no savior. He was the storm itself, a rival Alpha with blood on his hands, a curse in his veins, and eyes that saw through the soul. One storm-lit night, their fates collided. Chains and crowns, hate and desire, a bargain sealed in betrayal, and fire. The beggar of war would rise as a king, the prisoner of love would burn as a queen, but love, like kingdoms, always demands a sacrifice. Chapter 1. The Bargain of Blood. The hall smelled of iron, damp stone and smoke, the scent of war that no fire could cleanse. Shadows gathered thick against the vaulted ceiling, flickering with the restless light of torches. Banners that once boasted pride now hung in tatters, dripping with rain that seeped through cracks in the fortress walls. It should have been a night of victory, but the silence was too heavy. Ilara stood at the edge of the chamber, her wrists cold beneath the bite of iron shackles. She had not spoken since they dragged her from her father's home, not since the decree had been sealed in blood. Her father's war had raged for 7 years. It ended tonight, and the price was her, not a ransom, not a treaty, a payment. She lifted her gaze slowly, trying not to flinch, as her eyes fell on the man seated at the far end of the chamber. The rival Alpha. Kaelin. He wore no crown, but power coiled around him like smoke around flame. His hair was dark, wet from the storm, falling loose around a face carved from shadow and fire. Tattoos marked his arms, curling in patterns that glowed faintly when the torchlight kissed them, like embers etched into skin. His eyes, wolf's eyes, were not gold, not silver, but a stormed, merciless grey. They lingered on her with the patience of a predator who had all the time in the world. He did not smile when he looked at her. He only spoke, and his voice cut through the silence. "Bring her forward." Her breath hitched. Chains rattled as guards shoved her closer, until she stood in the circle of torchlight at the center of the hall. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the stones themselves mourned what was being done here. Kaelin's gaze swept over her, not as a man looks at a woman, but as an Alpha weighs what has been promised. A bargain sealed not by her will, but by her father's cowardice. "Daughter of Lord Arik," he said, his tone unreadable, his grey eyes never leaving hers. "Do you understand what has been done?" Ilara forced her chin up, though her throat burned with unshed words. Her voice cracked, but she managed, "I am the price." Something flickered in his gaze, not pity, not kindness, something darker, recognition. As if he knew that sentence by heart, as if he had once spoken it himself. The chamber shifted with uneasy murmurs, the gathered wolves from both sides restless. This was no ordinary exchange. It was humiliation disguised as peace. Kaelin rose from his seat. He moved with the unhurried grace of a predator, his boots echoing against the stone, each step pulling the air tighter around her lungs. When he stood before her, the storm seemed to follow. She could smell the rain still clinging to his skin, hear the faint crackle of energy that seemed to hum beneath his tattoos. He reached out, not to strike, not to harm, but to take the chain between her wrists in his hand. The metal strained, then snapped as if it were made of twine. Gasps scattered across the hall, but Kaelin said nothing. He simply let the broken chains fall between them, his hand brushing hers for a breath too long. The heat of that touch was wrong, too sharp, too alive. Elara drew back, but his voice followed, low, dark, carrying weight like thunder. "You are no longer theirs." His eyes pinned her. "From this night forward, you are mine." The words sealed more than the bargain. They sealed fate. But fate is never so simple. At the edge of the hall, a woman stepped forward. She wore red velvet robes, her hair the pale sheen of silver, her smile sharp as glass. Lady Seraphine, Kaelin's advisor, and some whispered his shadow. She was a woman whose ambitions were whispered of in corridors and carried in rumors through the markets. She curtsied with calculated grace, her eyes flicking to Elara. "So the debt is paid," Seraphine purred. "But debts have a way of growing." Her words struck the chamber like a match. Wolves stirred. Some sneered, some whispered, some shifted uneasily. Kaelin's jaw flexed, but he said nothing to silence her. Only his hand tightened slightly at his side, the faintest tremor in the storm-grey calm of his eyes. Elara felt it then, the threads of something larger, woven into this exchange. She was not just payment. She was a move in a game older, darker, more dangerous than her father had ever confessed. The storm outside cracked the sky open. Thunder rolled through the stones of the fortress as if the world itself bore witness. And in that sound, Elara knew. She was not entering peace. She was stepping into war. Chapter 2, Chains Without Iron. The storm followed them. Elara sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap as the carriage rattled through the night. The broken chains lay at her feet, mocking her with every jolt of the wheels. She had thought freedom might feel lighter. Instead, her wrists still burned with the weight of invisible shackles. Across from her sat Kaelin, the rival Alpha, who now claimed her as his own. He hadn't spoken since leaving the war hall, hadn't so much as glanced at her, though she could feel the gravity of his presence pulling at every breath she drew. It pressed against her ribs like a blade. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him. But when the torchlight flickered through the carriage window, striking the storm grey of his eyes, something restless stirred within her, a pulse, sharp and unbidden, that frightened her more than the chains ever had. The silence broke only when the carriage lurched to a stop. Kaelin's voice, quiet but commanding, cut through the storm. "We're here." The door swung open, and Elara blinked against the downpour. The fortress before them rose like a beast from the earth, black stone walls slick with rain, towers clawing at the storm-torn sky. Lightning etched its silhouette in fire, revealing banners of deep crimson snapping in the wind. Not a home, a stronghold. And now, her prison. 2 figures waited at the gates, cloaks pulled tight against the storm. One was broad and scarred, with eyes like tempered steel, the kind of man born to war. The other was younger, softer, with an almost boyish unease in his posture. Kaelin's voice cut low as they bowed their heads. "Darius." Rowan, the scarred man, Darius, straightened. His gaze swept over Elara, hard as stone. "So the payment arrives." His tone was flat, but there was a flicker of disapproval beneath it, sharp as a knife. Rowan, the younger, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes were gentler, catching hers with something that almost looked like pity. "She looks—" He stopped, biting back the rest of the words. Kaelin's gaze silenced them both. "See that her chambers are prepared." Elara bristled at the word chambers. Not a guest room, not a home, a cage with finer walls. She followed as they led her inside. The fortress halls were cold, lit by iron sconces that spat shadows against damp stone. Wolves lingered in the corners, some watching with curiosity, others with contempt. None dared to speak. When at last they stopped, Darius pushed open a heavy oak door. The chamber beyond was bare but clean, stone walls, a narrow bed, a window barred against the storm. A single candle burned on the table, its flame fragile against the draught. Elara stepped inside. Her body screamed to collapse onto the bed, but pride kept her standing. "This is my cage, then?" she asked, her voice low but edged with steel. Darius did not flinch. "Better than the grave your father bargained you into." Rowan shot him a warning look, but Elara caught the truth in his words. Her father had signed her fate away without hesitation, a sacrifice disguised as a truce. Kaelin's voice came from the doorway, calm but final. "Rest. Tomorrow you begin to understand what it means to live here." He turned and left without another word, the storm closing behind him like a cloak. Elara sat at the narrow window, watching the rain slash against the bars. Every shadow seemed to breathe, every silence pressed too close. She thought of her father, of the look in his eyes when they led her away, not guilt, not grief, but relief. He had been willing to bleed her name from his house to buy another day of power. Tears burned her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She would not break, not here, not yet. The door creaked softly. She turned, startled. Rowan slipped inside, a tray of bread and broth balanced in his hands. "You should eat," he whispered. "The rival Alpha won't forgive weakness." Elara stared at him, searching his face for cruelty, for mockery, but his eyes were kind, uncertain. He set the tray down and lingered, his voice dropping. "I know this isn't what you wanted. None of us did." He hesitated. "But Kaelin isn't what he seems either." She wanted to ask what he meant, but footsteps echoed in the hall. Rowan stiffened. With a last fleeting glance he slipped out, leaving only the faint warmth of his words behind. Elara sat in the silence again, staring at the untouched bread. "Kaelin isn't what he seems." She wrapped the words around herself like a cloak, and for the first time since the chains had snapped, she wondered, not what had been taken from her, but what she might yet uncover. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside her chest, something stirred, fragile and defiant. Not hope, not yet, but the whisper of it. Chapter 3. The woman with storm in her eyes. The rain had not stopped since that night in the cathedral ruins. It came in sheets, thin and relentless, as if the heavens themselves wished to wash the city of its sins. The gutters overflowed, carrying away filth and ash, but not the rot buried in stone. Kaelin knew. No water could cleanse betrayal. He had not seen her again. Not yet. But her face, her face haunted him. The way her eyes, grey, storm-filled, restless, had cut straight through the filth of his rags, not with pity, not even with fear, but with recognition. That single heartbeat where she had looked at him as though she knew the truth of what he was, that was what lingered. He hated it. He craved it. Kaelin sat in the damp hollow of a broken tavern cellar, back against the crumbling stone. Rats moved in the shadows. A rusted blade leaned at his side, more relic than weapon. He had been content, at least he told himself he had been content, to rot in the margins of the city, to let his curse fester in silence until time consumed him. But then she had seen him, and now the fire in his chest burned again. Elara, that was her name, the woman with ink-stained fingers, a scribe for the monastery library, or at least she had been once. She had fled when the monks began burning books they deemed dangerous, words that spoke of wolves, moons, and fates written in blood. Now she lived in shadows too, carrying scraps of parchment as if words themselves were armor. She had not meant to find Kaelin. She had only meant to shelter from the storm. But fate has no regard for intent. And when she had stumbled into that cathedral ruin, and her candlelight had caught his face, something had bound them. He could not afford weakness, he could not afford to be seen. But on the fourth night, the door to the cellar creaked, and the faint glow of a lantern cut through the damp dark. Kaelin froze. His hand wrapped around the rusted blade. "Don't," her voice came. Low, steady, certain. He should have growled. He should have driven her away. Instead, he watched as she descended the steps, water dripping from her cloak, leaving a trail like silver threads. She carried no weapon, only the lantern and a satchel that smelled of bread. She placed it before him without speaking. Kaelin stared at it, then at her. "What game is this?" His voice was rough, the growl of a wolf caged too long. "No game," she answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You're starving." His hand clenched tighter around the blade. "And what do you gain, feeding a beggar?" Her lips curved, but not in mockery. In defiance. "Maybe I don't like seeing kings brought to their knees." The blade slipped from his fingers. It clattered against the stone, the sound sharp as thunder in the silence that followed. That was how it began. With bread, with silence, with two shadows sharing the same storm. But storms never linger without striking, because while Kaelin fought to bury the truth of who he was, Alira sought it. She asked nothing, yet her gaze asked everything. And one night, as the rain roared louder than the bells of the cathedral ever had, she whispered words that made his curse stir. "You were not meant for rags," she said. "You were meant for a crown." The wolf inside him lifted its head. The fire he had smothered sparked, and Kaelin knew fate had begun its cruel game again. But in the city above, others stirred too. The rival Alpha who had seized his throne, the man who had cursed him into shadow, and whispers travelled through taverns and guardhouses like smoke in the wind. Whispers of a beggar who bore the eyes of a wolf, whispers of a woman who dared walk beside him. And whispers, Kaelin knew, could kill. By the end of that night, Kaelin had made a choice. He would no longer wait for fate to play its hand. He would take it. With Alira at his side, whether she chose it or not, the beggar would rise, and the king would awaken. But kingship was never free. It would demand sacrifice, and love was the cruelest sacrifice of all. Chapter 4. The Rival's Shadow. The city had a way of breathing. At night, it exhaled through cracks in stone, through whispers that coiled like smoke in taverns where men drank too hard to forget the weight of chains. And in those whispers, one name had begun to stir, a name Kaelin thought buried in mud and rot, the beggar wolf. The moniker slipped from drunk tongues and carried on the lips of thieves, murmured by washerwomen, as they scrubbed blood from soldiers' cloaks. A ghost king. A wolf too stubborn to die, and far above, in the keep of black stone that overlooked the drowned streets, the rival Alpha heard, Darius. He was nothing like Kaelin. Where Kaelin had been a wolf born under a hunter's moon, tempered by fire and ritual, Darius had clawed his way from the gutters. No crown had been promised to him. He had seized it with bloodied hands, and he ruled not with blessing, but with fear. His throne was built on betrayal, the night Kaelin's own brother had let him fall. That memory still curdled in Kaelin's gut, though he tried not to breathe it. Now, Darius sat in the king's chair, iron-ringed and cold, draped in furs that did not belong to him. His skin was a map of scars, inked over with black runes etched to bind wolves to his will. Even in the warmth of the hearth, his presence chilled the hall. It was in this hall, beneath torchlight that never seemed bright enough, that he heard the whispers. A beggar with wolf fire in his eyes, a ghost who walked in rain, a woman at his side. Darius's mouth curved, not with amusement, but with something sharper. "Let them whisper," he said, voice low, a growl beneath the words. "It means they remember who he was, and remembering is dangerous." He leaned forward on the throne, eyes glinting like coals. "Find the woman." Beneath that command, the city grew sharper. Every shadow was watched, every alley grew teeth. And Elira, though she carried her lantern and her parchment with stubborn calm, felt the shift. She had begun to return each night. At first to bring bread, then to listen. Kaelin spoke little. His voice carried the weight of someone who knew words could build kingdoms or ruin them. But Elara, she filled the silence. Stories of books she had saved, of ink she had hidden under her skin, of songs that once belonged to the wolves. And little by little, Kaelin found himself answering. Not in stories, but in pieces of himself. The way the curse clawed at his ribs when the moon rose too high. The way betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth, even years after it had burned him hollow. Elira did not recoil. She leaned closer, always closer. There were nights when her shoulder brushed his in the dark, nights when her storm-filled eyes lingered too long on his scars. And Kaelin, though he told himself she was nothing, just a woman who had wandered too far, felt the fire inside him catch every time she did. He wanted her gone. He needed her near. And that was the cruelest curse of all. But fate never let wolves rest. It was a night when thunder shook the cellar walls. Elira had brought not bread this time, but a roll of parchment so old it cracked when unrolled. She smoothed it with careful fingers, lantern light trembling across the words. "It's a chronicle," she whispered. "One the monks tried to burn. I saved it." Kaelin leaned forward, heart clawing in his chest when he saw the ink. The words were old, but he knew them. Every Alpha child was taught the tale before he could walk. The prophecy of the moon's chosen, a king cast down, a crown lost to blood, a wolf bound in rags until the storm awakens him again. His breath came harsh, too loud in the silence. "Where did you get this?" Elira's eyes found his, steady as the storm. "I told you, I saved it. Because I think it's about you." The wolf inside him surged, howled, like chains snapping in his chest. But before he could speak, before he could tell her to burn it, footsteps cracked the silence above. Heavy, armed, too many. Kaelin's instincts flared sharp and wild. He grabbed Elira's wrist, pulled her into the shadows. Her breath hitched, but she did not cry out. The cellar door groaned. Light spilled in. Voices. "Search here. The Alpha wants the woman alive." Elira's fingers clenched Kaelin's hand, and in that moment, as his curse trembled like fire under his skin, Kaelin knew the rival's shadow had found them. They had come for her, but to reach her, they would have to face him. And for the first time in years, Kaelin felt the wolf rise, not as a curse, not as a ruin. Chapter 5. The wolf breaks the chains. The cellar was no longer a cellar, it was a tomb. The air shifted the moment the intruders broke the threshold, heavy boots grinding stone dust into the floor. Torchlight spilled down the stairs, not warm, but jagged, harsh like a blade pressed against skin. The glow carved the silhouettes of Darius's soldiers into the darkness, turning men into monsters with shadows that clung to the walls like claws. Elira's breath was sharp and fast beside him, but she did not scream. Kaelin felt her trembling through the clasp of their joined hands, yet when he looked into her eyes, storm-tossed, unyielding, there was no surrender there, only defiance. That defiance cracked something in him. For years, Kaelin had crouched in the dark like a beaten dog, hiding his fire. But here, with Elira's hand in his, he felt the weight of chains grinding tighter around his ribs, as though the wolf itself was clawing against the walls of his chest. "Search every corner," one of the soldiers growled. His voice was hoarse, guttural. "The woman's scent lingers here." Another snarled, "Careful. If the ghost wolf is here, he'll not die easy." Kaelin's jaw locked. His curse burned hot, a fever beneath his skin. Ghost wolf, beggar, hollow. They spoke his name as if it were nothing, as if the blood in his veins were not once sanctified by the goddess herself. The torches drew closer, iron boots against stone, a blade scraped from its sheath. Elira's nails dug into his palm. She didn't need to speak. He understood her plea. "Don't move. Stay hidden. Don't die." But Kaelin was already moving. He let go of her hand with a sharp breath and stepped into the open. The soldiers froze, torches flaring against his ragged frame. At first they laughed. A beggar, barefoot, draped in rags, hair falling across his gaunt face. "Is this the ghost?" one jeered. "No king, just a rat." The laugh was cut short, because the wolf stirred. It began with his eyes, once a dull human shade, now burning molten gold, catching the torchlight and twisting it into fire. Then his body shifted. His spine arched with the agony of something caged too long pressing against bone. Fingers curled into claws, not fully wolf, not fully man, caught in the half-form of the cursed. Veins glowed faintly along his skin, black as ink, crawling up his arms like serpents. The soldiers staggered. Fear cracked their jeers. And when Kaelin spoke, his voice was both his own and something deeper, something ancient. "You will not touch her." The wolf inside him howled. It did not matter that his strength was only a shadow of what it had once been. Rage lent him teeth, grief lent him claws. He lunged, faster than a starving body should have allowed, and the first soldier's torch clattered to the ground as Kaelin drove him into the stone wall. A scream tore the air, short, sharp, silenced as claws ripped through leather and flesh. Blood sprayed hot, metallic, staining Kaelin's ragged tunic. The others rushed him, blades flashing. Elira pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, not in fear of him, but in the awe of someone watching fire consume dry earth. She should have run. Instead, she whispered his name like a prayer. Kaelin's movements were raw, unrefined. Not the fluid grace of a wolf born to rule, but the savage ferocity of something half-broken. He fought like a man dragging himself out of a grave, every strike fueled not by skill, but by refusal. Steel cut his side, searing. Another blade pierced his arm, but pain only drove him deeper into the shift. His face twisted, jaw elongating, teeth sharper, lips curling back in a snarl that shook the cellar walls. One by one, the soldiers fell, some choking on blood, some scrambling up the stairs with screams of the curse. "He's alive," echoing into the storm. And then silence. Only the thunder above. Kaelin staggered, chest heaving, blood dripping from his hands. The wolf within him still raged, clawing for full release, but he forced it back with a growl that ripped his throat raw. "Elira!" His voice cracked, torn between beast and man. She was already at his side, her hands, small, ink-stained, trembling, pressed against his wounds. "You're bleeding. I told you to run." His words came ragged, more a growl than speech. She lifted her eyes to his, and he saw it again, the storm, steady and unbroken. "I told you I wouldn't." The wolf went quiet inside him, not gone, never gone, but quiet. They stood together in the wreckage of the cellar, the bodies of soldiers cooling around them. Outside the storm howled, rain battering the city like drums of war. Kaelin looked at her, at the woman fate had dropped into his darkness, and for the first time in years he allowed himself a thought he had buried with his crown. Perhaps I am not finished. But far above, in the keep of black stone, Darius lifted his head as the storm split the night. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. So the beggar breathes. And in his hand he closed a scroll bound with blood-red ribbon. A name written on its parchment glowed faintly in the firelight. Elira. Chapter 6. The Rival's Game. The storm did not end that night. It lingered like a curse, rolling over the rooftops, pouring through gutters, swelling the river until the whole city seemed to drown under its weight. In the ruins of the cellar, Kaelin pressed his back against the stone wall, breath ragged, wounds burning. Elira knelt before him, tearing strips of cloth from her skirt to bind his side. Her fingers shook, but her voice did not. "You'll bleed out if you don't let me help." Kaelin grimaced as she pressed fabric to the wound. "I heal faster than men." His tone was rough, half human, half wolf. But the curse slows it. The wounds linger longer than they should. Then all the more reason you need me. Her words silenced him. He studied her face in the flicker of dying torchlight, ink-stained hands, rain-matted hair, eyes that met his with stubborn resolve. She was no warrior, no healer trained by tradition, yet she worked with steady determination, as if her will alone could hold him together. The wolf inside him, always clawing, always restless, grew still. It watched her, it approved. Far above them, in the black stone keep, Alpha Darius stood before a window, his eyes reflecting the storm. Where Kaelin's fire was gold, Darius's gaze burned crimson, a cruel flame, born of conquest and blood oaths. Behind him, his Lieutenant Marek waited, a hulking wolf soldier with scars across his jaw. Marek was loyalty carved into flesh. "They say the beggar fought back," Marek said, his voice gravel, low. Half shifted. "Killed a handful of men," Darius smiled, slow, sharp, venomous. "Good." Marek's brow furrowed. "Good. Do you not see, Marek? A beggar who bleeds like a man, yet fights like a wolf. Whispers will spread through the gutters, then through the courts. They'll remember him." He turned from the window, shadows cutting across his face. "And when they remember Kaelin, they will remember me. His ruin is my crown." He unfurled the blood-ribbon scroll on his table. The ink shimmered faintly in the torchlight, Elira's name glowing like an ember. "She is the key," Darius said. "The curse shackled Kaelin, but it will not hold forever. The woman will bind him where chains cannot. Break her, and he breaks with her. Take her, and he will crawl into my hand." Back in the cellar, Kaelin stirred, dragging himself upright, despite Elira's protest. "You should rest," she said, catching his arm. "I cannot—" His voice was sharper than he intended. He softened when her eyes flashed hurt. "If soldiers escaped, word is already running through the streets. Darius will know. He always knows." Her lips parted as though to argue, but then she fell silent. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she had stumbled into. "Then where do we go?" she whispered. Kaelin's eyes swept the room, the fallen soldiers, the dripping stones. He hated the answer before he spoke it. "To the old quarter. To those who still remember me, the old quarter was not a place of safety. It was a place of shadows." When dawn cracked grey and bitter over the storm-drenched city, Kaelin and Elira slipped through alleys, avoiding patrols. His hood masked his face, but nothing could mask his presence. He was fire smothered in ash, and those who brushed past him felt it. The strange prickling on the skin, the whisper that this beggar was not as he seemed. Elira stayed close, her ink-stained hand clutching the edge of his sleeve. She had never known fear in the quiet, book-bound life she once lived. But now, every echo of boots, every growl of thunder felt like teeth closing around her. They came at last to the heart of the old quarter, a crumbling cathedral long abandoned by priests. Its spire leaned like a broken bone against the sky. Inside, candles flickered, not holy but desperate, and men gathered. These were not soldiers, not nobles. They were the forgotten, the maimed, the scarred, the widowed. Once they had been Kaelin's people. Now they were survivors who bent knee to no one. The first to see him was Isolde, a sharp-eyed woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair. Her left arm ended in a stump, bound with leather straps, yet her gaze was unwavering. "By the goddess," she whispered. "It's him." Murmurs spread through the gathering. The beggar, the ghost wolf, the king who never was. Kaelin lowered his hood, and for the first time in years he faced them not as a shadow, but as himself. "I do not ask for loyalty," he said, his voice carrying through the cracked hall. "I do not ask for crowns. I ask for shelter." The people shifted uneasily. Some bowed heads, some spat on the floor. Isolde stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "We buried you in our hearts years ago. Why should we trust a ghost now?" Elira's breath caught, but Kaelin did not flinch. "Because the storm has returned," he said, "and I carry the thunder in my blood." The words hung heavy, like prophecy. For a moment, silence. Then whispers turned to oaths. They would not yet call him king, but they would not turn him away. That night, as Elira lay on a pallet of old wool, listening to the rain against the broken glass of cathedral windows, she felt the shift in her heart. Kaelin was no beggar. He was fire buried in ash, and she, ink-stained, unworthy, unwanted, had been the one to stir it. But in the keep of black stone, Darius moved his pieces across the board. He did not strike yet. No, he was patient. He sent Marek with whispers, with spies, with gifts to corrupt the weak. And at the edge of his army's map, he drew a single mark over the cathedral's spire. A wolf's head. Chapter 7. The Betrayer's Whisper. The cathedral groaned in the night. Wind clawed through the shattered glass, rattling loose stones, carrying with it the smell of rain-soaked ash. Candles guttered in their holders, throwing shadows like restless spirits across the cracked altar. Elira stirred from uneasy sleep. The pallet beneath her was damp, the wool reeking of mildew. But it was not discomfort that woke her. It was the feeling of being watched. She turned her head slowly. In the far corner of the cathedral, half shrouded in flickering dark, Kaelin sat alone. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands steepled against his mouth. His golden eyes burned faintly in the dim light, wolf's fire refusing to be smothered. He looked less like a beggar now, less like a man, more like the storm itself, chained but gathering. Elira pushed herself up, her heart thudding louder than it should. "You haven't slept." Kaelin didn't move. Sleep is for those who do not hear footsteps in every shadow. The bitterness in his tone carried the weight of years. She rose and crossed the broken floor toward him, her bare feet whispering on the stone. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. At that his gaze lifted to hers. There was pain in his eyes, raw, unhealed, but blazing with something else beneath it. Something dangerous. You don't understand, he said. When you carry fire inside you, everyone around you either wants to steal it or burn in it. Illyria's throat tightened, but she did not look away. She placed a trembling hand over his, steady despite the racing of her heart. "Then let me burn," she whispered. Kaelin inhaled sharply, as if her words cut deeper than any blade. He didn't answer, but his hand tightened over hers, his claws threatening to break skin, yet he pulled back at the last second, forcing the wolf down. The following day, the cathedral filled with the murmurs of those who had once followed him. Isolde stood before Kaelin, her silver-streaked hair bound back, her one arm crossed over her chest. "The people whisper your name again. Some call you Savior, others call you Curse." "Both may be true," Kaelin replied. From the shadows, another voice slid like oil. "And some call you Fool." The man who spoke was Tomas, a lean wolf with sharp features and sharper ambition. Once Kaelin's page, he had survived the years of ruin by turning coin into power. Now he wore fine clothes ill-suited to the cathedral's ruin. "You think these people will rise for you again?" Tomas sneered. "They have nothing. They are nothing. Darius offers bread. You offer thunder." Kaelin's jaw tensed. "Thunder breaks chains. Thunder kills crops," Tomas smirked. "And chains can be gilded." The words fell heavy. Illyria, standing at Kaelin's side, saw the flicker in Tomas's eyes. Greed, envy, the same poison that had once shattered Kaelin's kingdom. "Tomas," Kaelin said, voice low, dangerous. "If your loyalty wavers, speak it plain. Do not poison the air with whispers." But Tomas only bowed mockingly and stepped back, his smirk never leaving. That night, Illyria found herself drawn again to Kaelin. The storm had eased, but inside the cathedral the tension thickened. She sat beside him, listening to the silence. "You knew him," she said quietly. Kaelin's eyes stayed on the ruined altar. "He carried my banners once. I thought him loyal, but loyalty bought with bread rots quickly when gold shines brighter." Illyria hesitated, then asked, "And what of love? Can it hold longer than bread and gold?" For a moment the air stilled. His gaze shifted, slow, deliberate, until it met hers. "It burns longer," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. "But it leaves deeper scars." The weight of those words settled heavy between them, and though Illyria should have been afraid, she wasn't. She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. For the first time, he didn't pull away. In the dead of night, Tomas slipped through the cathedral's side doors. The rain had ceased, leaving the air thick and damp. Marek waited in the alley, a shadow with crimson eyes, Darius's hound. "You said you wanted coin," Marek rumbled, his scarred jaw twisting. "And power," Tomas replied. His grin was thin, sharp. "Kaelin stirs the people, but he is broken. You want him crushed? I can make it happen." Marek's hand closed around Tomas's shoulder, iron strong. "Then prove it." And in that instant, the first dagger of betrayal was drawn. Back inside the cathedral, Kaelin lay restless, the wolf pacing beneath his skin. His instincts clawed at him, warning of danger, betrayal, shadows moving where they shouldn't. He sat upright, golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Across the room, Illyria stirred in her sleep, her ink-stained hand curled into her chest. For the first time, Kaelin let himself admit it, not aloud, but deep in the secret chamber of his soul. She was his anchor, his fire, his weakness, and Darius would use her to break him. Kaelin stood, every nerve alive with stormlight. He knew what was coming. The rivals' game had begun. Chapter 8. Ashes in the Cathedral. The bells of the ruined cathedral never rang any more. Their tongues had rusted still, their bronze throats cracked. Yet that night something made the air itself toll with an invisible warning. Kaelin felt it first, a prickle along his spine, the wolf inside his blood lifting its head, ears pricked to danger. He sat in silence on the fractured altar, his broad frame bent forward, hands braced on his knees. Golden eyes flickered faintly in the dark, catching the last glow of guttering candles. "Elira," he murmured. She stirred awake on her pallet, hair unbound, ink-smudged fingers curling as she blinked toward him. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the broken doors, the shattered windows, the shadows between the cracked stone columns. The night pressed heavy around them, silent, too silent. "The air's wrong," he said at last. His voice was low, edged, the growl of a wolf who tasted the shift in the wind, the kind of wrong that comes before blood. Elira sat upright, pulse quickening. She had learned enough in her short time with him to trust his instincts. They were rarely wrong. And then, a sound. Soft, wrong. A whisper of feet across stone. Kaelin rose in a single fluid movement, his ragged cloak falling like shadow. "Stay here," he ordered. But Elira shook her head, stubborn as the storm. "I won't hide while you stay." The word cracked like thunder, heavy with command. For a heartbeat, silence. She swallowed hard, her body trembling, but nodded. Kaelin turned, stalking toward the cathedral's main aisle, his senses sharpened, every drip of rain through the broken roof, every shift of the cold night wind. The wolf pressed harder inside him, snarling, demanding release. His claws itched against his palms. And then they came. Figures in the doorway, their outlines cut sharp against the stormlight outside. Cloaked men, moving with predator's purpose. And behind them, hulking in silence, Marek, the scarred wolf with crimson eyes, Darius's hound. "Kaelin." Marek's voice was gravel dragged across stone. The Alpha who traded a crown for rags. Kaelin stepped forward, no fear in his stance, only steel, better rags than a leash. Marek's lips curled, exposing teeth. The cloaked men spread wide, weapons glinting. The scent of iron filled the air. And from the shadows at the side of the cathedral, Tomas appeared. His fine clothes looked gaudy against the ruin, but his smirk was sharp as a blade. "Didn't I tell you, Kaelin? Thunder kills crops. These people would rather eat bread than chase your storms." Elira's breath caught. Betrayal. She had felt it coiling in Tomas's words the day before, but seeing him stand at Marek's side cut like a knife. Kaelin's golden eyes blazed hotter. "You," Tomas spread his hands mockingly. "Me, the boy you once trusted with your banners. I learned well, didn't I? Learned that loyalty is a poor currency. Darius pays better." The wolf in Kaelin surged, furious, clawing at its chains. For a moment his teeth lengthened, his nails darkening into claws. His voice was a growl when he spoke. "Step aside, Tomas, before I show you what loyalty costs." But Tomas only laughed. The first blade was drawn, steel hissed in the candlelight. The cloaked men rushed forward, boots thundering across stone. The cathedral erupted in chaos. Kaelin moved like the storm itself. His body flowed with preternatural speed, claws flashing, cloak whipping like shadow. He struck one man down with a single blow, sending him sprawling across broken pews. Another came at him with an axe. Kaelin caught the haft, wrenched it free, and shattered it against the column. Elira pressed herself against the altar, terror rising, but her eyes never left him. He was a beast, a king, a storm unchained. Yet in every movement she saw discipline, control. He fought not only his enemies, but the wolf inside that demanded blood without mercy. Marek pushed forward, massive and unrelenting. His crimson eyes glowed, his strength monstrous. Kaelin met him head-on, claws clashing against claws, the sound of bone and fury filling the cathedral. "You're still broken," Marek snarled, shoving him back. "A king who begged in the streets. You think love will make you whole?" Kaelin staggered, teeth bared. "Love," he growled, "will burn your empire." In the chaos, Tomas slipped closer to the altar. His eyes fell on Elira. "Pretty little scribe," he said with a smile that chilled. "Does he tell you he's cursed? That everything he touches rots?" "You'll learn." Elira's heart thundered, but she didn't flinch. She rose, clutching a broken candle stand like a weapon. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned. "I've learned enough to see you for what you are." Tomas sneered. "And what's that?" "A coward who feeds on scraps of power." She swung the stand, catching him across the face. Blood spattered, his smirk twisting into rage. "You'll pay for that," he hissed, raising a dagger. But before he could strike, Kaelin roared. The sound split the cathedral, shaking the broken rafters. He hurled Marek aside, his claws dripping crimson, and in an instant he was between Elira and Tomas. Tomas stumbled back, his dagger trembling. For the first time, fear cracked his smirk. Kaelin loomed over him, half-shifted, golden eyes burning. His voice was thunder made flesh. The fight did not end that night. Marek pulled Tomas back, retreating with a snarl. "Not tonight, Kaelin. Darius wants you to bleed slow." The cloaked men followed, dragging their wounded. The cathedral lay in ruins, candles extinguished, blood smeared across cracked stone. When silence returned, it was heavy. Kaelin turned slowly, his chest heaving, his body trembling on the edge of the shift. The wolf howled inside him, hungry, furious, demanding to chase. But then Elira's hand touched his arm. "Kaelin," she whispered, "look at me." Golden eyes met storm grey. Her touch steadied him, anchored him, brought him back from the edge. Slowly, painfully, his claws receded. His breath steadied. The wolf snarled but yielded. He dropped to his knees, exhausted, trembling, and Elira knelt with him, her hands cupping his face, ink-stained fingers against his scarred skin. "You're not broken," she whispered fiercely. "Not to me." Kaelin closed his eyes, the words sinking into the places he thought would never heal. For the first time in years, he almost believed. Chapter 9. Whispers of the Beggar King. The storm had not ended with the battle. It lingered, pressing heavy against the broken roof of the cathedral. Rain poured through shattered beams, striking the stone floor in endless rivulets. Lightning illuminated the fractured windows, sketching shadows across Kaelin's worn face. He sat slumped against a column, blood streaking his arms, his breath slow and uneven. His body was healing. Wolves always did. But the exhaustion ran deeper than flesh. It pressed into bone, into the marrow of memory. Elira remained close, her ink-stained fingers trembling as she cleaned his wounds with strips torn from her cloak. She worked silently, but her every glance was sharp, storm-filled, heavy with unspoken questions. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was low. "They knew where to find you." Kaelin's golden eyes flicked to her, the shadows deep in their glow. "Yes, that means someone." Her throat tightened. "Someone you once trusted told them. Tomas." The name left Kaelin like poison. Elira swallowed hard, nodding. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. The boy who had once been Kaelin's page, the one who claimed loyalty like a badge, had walked into the cathedral with Darius's hound at his side. Kaelin leaned his head back against the stone, his eyes fixed on the flickering shadows. "Betrayal has many faces, Illyra. Tomas was always hungry for approval. I mistook it for loyalty." His tone was flat, but beneath it ran a current of something sharper. Not grief, not shock, but guilt, raw and gnawing. Illyra's hands stilled. "You blame yourself." "I raised him," Kaelin said, his voice rough. "Fed him, taught him, trusted him with secrets that should have been guarded by blood." His jaw clenched. "And now he sells those secrets to Darius for silver and scraps of power." Illyra leaned closer, her storm-grey eyes fierce. "Then Tomas is a fool. His betrayal is his own. Don't carry his sin on your shoulders." Kaelin turned his gaze on her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You speak as if it's easy to set down the weight." She met his stare, unflinching. "I speak as if I know what it is to carry one that was never mine." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence, its thunder echoing like the growl of unseen wolves. By dawn, the cathedral had changed. Word had spread, faster than fire in a dry field. The beggars, the thieves, the forgotten souls of the city's gutters drifted toward the ruins. At first they came in twos and threes, curious, whispering. By morning there were dozens, by noon nearly 100. They gathered in the aisles, among broken pews, beneath the collapsed rafters. Children with hollow cheeks, women with shawls pulled tight, men with scars and eyes too tired for hope. They came because of the fight, because of the roar they'd heard in the night. And they came because of the whispers. The beggar fought them. The beggar bled for us. The beggar is king. Kaelin stood before them reluctantly, his cloak still ragged, his hands still bandaged from the night before, but his golden eyes burned in the dim light, fierce despite the exhaustion in his body. "These walls won't protect you," he told them, his voice steady, carrying through the ruin. "This place is broken, like me, like all of us," a ripple of murmurs. "But broken stone can be rebuilt, and broken men." His gaze swept across them, sharp, piercing. "Broken men can rise." The crowd stirred, faces lifted, eyes sharpened. A boy at the front, no older than 12, raised his voice. "My father said the beggar king was only a story, a curse to scare us." Kaelin's lips curved in a grim half-smile. "Your father was right. I am cursed. But curses don't frighten me. Kings who rule with fear, those do." The boy's eyes widened, and others in the crowd leaned forward, hungry for every word. Illyra stood to the side, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with awe. She saw what they saw, not a beggar, not a ruined man, but a leader who carried storms in his chest. And yet she also saw the weight he bore, the cracks no one else could see. Among the gathered came new faces. A scarred woman named Mayra, once a soldier in Kaelin's army, now working the river docks. She stepped forward, her voice rough. "I remember the banner you carried, the wolf crowned in silver. I thought it was lost." Kaelin's eyes narrowed faintly. "And yet you stand before me." "I stand," she said, "because I'd rather fight beneath a broken banner than kneel to Darius's throne." Her words drew murmurs of agreement. Another stepped forward, Bryn, a blacksmith with soot-stained hands. "I've watched my tools turned into chains, my iron beaten into bars. If you'll lead, I'll forge for freedom again." The murmurs grew louder, and then an elder, frail but fierce-eyed, leaned on her staff. "The people are starving, Kaelin. If you would be their king, know this: hunger will kill faster than swords. Can you feed them?" A heavy silence. All eyes turned to him. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He did not answer at once. He weighed his words, knowing the wrong one could shatter the fragile spark in their eyes. Finally, his voice came low, steady. "I cannot promise you feasts, but I can promise you this. I will not eat while you starve. I will not stand while you fall. And I will not beg for scraps at the tables of tyrants. If you choose me, you choose to rise or die on your feet." For a moment, silence, then cheers. Small at first, ragged but growing. A fire sparked in the broken cathedral, one that could not be quenched by rain. Elira felt her chest tighten. This was more than survival, more than rebellion. This was the birth of something larger, a movement, a legend, a reckoning. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Kaelin stood alone at the altar, his shoulders heavy. "You don't believe them," Elira said softly, stepping to his side. His eyes flicked to her. "Believe what? That you could be king again?" His silence was answer enough. Elira touched his arm gently. "They see more than rags when they look at you, and maybe I do too." Her voice trembled at the end, but she didn't look away. Kaelin's breath caught. The wolf inside him stirred, not with rage but with something far more dangerous. Desire. He studied her, the ink stains on her fingers, the storm in her eyes, the stubborn tilt of her chin. She was no queen, no warrior, yet she was stronger than most kings he had ever known. "Careful, Elira," he murmured, his voice low, dangerous. "You'll start to believe the story yourself." She met his gaze unflinching. "Maybe I already do." Their eyes locked, the air between them taut, charged, almost unbearable. He could feel the pull, the dangerous thread tying them closer. But before the moment could break, the bells of the ruined cathedral groaned. For the first time in years, one bell swayed, struck by no hand. Its cracked voice echoed through the city, heavy, haunting. Kaelin stiffened, his golden eyes darkened. "That," he said, his tone grave, "is no omen of blessing. That is a warning." Elira's blood ran cold. Outside, in the storm, Darius's men were already marching. Chapter 10. The Bell That Called Wolves. The cracked cathedral bell had not tolled in 20 years. Its sound was broken, a shuddering groan of metal and age, yet it carried across the city like a curse resurrected. Even Darius, in his fortified manner, lifted his head when the note struck the night. The city paused in its breath, waiting. Some whispered that the dead stirred. Others muttered of omens. But those who knew the old ways, the old blood, understood at once. The bell had awakened because something in the balance of power had shifted. Kaelin stood in the ruined nave, rain dripping from the gaps in the roof, the echo of the bell vibrating through his chest. His wolf stirred uneasily, pressing against the walls of his skin. Instinct clawed at him, fight, run, claim, protect. Elira felt it too. She pressed closer, her storm-grey eyes darting to the shadows beyond the broken windows. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Kaelin's jaw clenched. "It means Darius has heard the whispers, and he will not let them grow into fire." As if summoned, voices rose outside. Dozens, then hundreds, shouts, commands, the hard tramp of boots against wet stone. Torches flickered beyond the arches, turning the storm into a theatre of fire. The people who had come, beggars, children, scarred workers, shifted uneasily. Fear rippled through them like wind through tall grass. Kaelin, Mera, the scarred ex-soldier, stepped to his side, her voice low and grim. "It's the city guard. They come to break us before we've begun." Bryn, the blacksmith, spat into the dirt, his soot-stained hands curling into fists. "They'll burn us out like rats if we stay in here." The elder woman leaned on her staff, her voice thin but sharp. "And if you run now, the story ends before it begins. They'll say the beggar king was nothing but smoke." Kaelin listened to them, his gaze sweeping the fragile faces that looked to him. They were no army. They had no weapons but rusted knives and broken bottles, no shields but rags soaked in rain. But they had something else, something Darius feared enough to send his men in the middle of the night. Hope. The cathedral doors shook with the first blow. A heavy ram struck the wood, splintering it with each hit. The people gasped, some clutching their children, others pressing against the cracked walls as if to vanish into stone. Kaelin stepped forward. His voice was steady, iron forged from storm. "You have no blades," he said, his golden eyes burning, "no shields. But you have what they cannot kill. You have voice, you have courage, you have choice." Another crash shook the doors. "They will break these walls," he continued, his voice rising above the storm and the hammering. "But remember this, every throne built on fear trembles when the people rise. You are not beggars. You are not forgotten. You are wolves, whether you wear fur or not. And tonight, you will howl." A murmur rippled through the crowd, hesitant, uncertain. Elira stepped forward, her ink-stained fingers clutching her cloak tight, her voice strong despite the tremor beneath it. "If you believe in him, believe in yourselves. Don't let Darius silence this before it begins." The ram struck again. The doors groaned, ready to give. Mara drew a rusted blade from her belt and raised it high. "Then let's show them what wolves in rags can do." Bryn hefted an iron bar, the blacksmith's muscles flexing. "Let them come." The elder woman raised her staff, her eyes fierce as any warrior's. "For too long we've begged for crumbs. Tonight we bite." The doors splintered. The final blow shattered them inward, wood exploding into shards. Soldiers in steel surged through the arch, torches flaring, swords gleaming. The people roared, not in fear, but in fury. The fight was chaos. Kaelin moved like shadow and storm, his wolf breaking through in flashes, golden eyes burning, claws raking, strength tearing through steel. He struck with precision, not savagery. Each blow calculated, each movement a shield for those behind him. Myra fought at his side, her blade an extension of her scarred hand. She took down a guard twice her size with a brutal twist, blood spraying against the rain. Bryn swung his iron bar, shattering helmets, breaking bones. He roared like a forge fire, every strike a hammer against oppression. Even the elder woman struck, her staff cracking against knees, her voice chanting old words that stirred the crowd to frenzy. And Elira was no fighter, but she was not still. She dragged the wounded to corners, pressed cloth to bleeding wounds, shouted warnings when soldiers advanced too close. Her ink-stained hands turned red, her storm eyes blazing. Kaelin's wolf howled within him, clawing, demanding to be unleashed fully. He fought it, teeth gritted, breath ragged. If he gave in, if he shifted here, among these fragile souls, he would not be Kaelin. He would be the beast, and the beast knew no ally from enemy. He fought on two fronts, against Darius's soldiers and against himself. Then came the moment that broke the tide. Through the chaos, Tomas appeared, the boy who had once been Kaelin's page, who had betrayed him, now strode in behind the guards, his cloak dry, his eyes wide with arrogance. In his hand he carried not a weapon, but a silver-tipped spear, an executioner's tool, gleaming in torchlight. He locked eyes with Kaelin and sneered. The beggar who thought himself king. The words cut deeper than steel. Kaelin's blood thundered, but his voice was low, dangerous. "You should have stayed in the shadows, boy," Tomas smirked. And miss the sight of you crawling? No. Tonight I deliver your head to Darius myself." He lunged. The spear cut through air, silver burning Kaelin's skin as it grazed his arm. Pain seared like fire, and for a heartbeat the wolf inside him surged. His vision blurred red, his claws lengthened, but Elira's voice pierced the storm. "Kaelen!" He turned, her eyes locking with his, fierce, storm-filled, human. It was enough. He caught Tomas's arm mid-strike, twisted and wrenched the spear free. With a roar he snapped it over his knee, silver shards falling useless to the ground. Tomas staggered back, his arrogance crumbling into fear. Kaelin's golden eyes burned. "Run back to your master. Tell him the beggar rises. Tell him the king returns." Tomas fled. The guards faltered, and the people, oh, the people roared. The soldiers broke, retreating into the storm, torches falling into puddles, their formation shattered by fear and fury. The cathedral remained standing, battered but unbroken. When silence finally returned, the people were bloodied, bruised, but alive. They looked to Kaelen, not with fear, not with doubt, but with fire in their eyes. "The beggar king," someone whispered. "The beggar king lives," another said louder. The words spread, echoing through the broken arches. Kaelen stood among them, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds. His gaze sought Elira's. She was there, ink-stained hands red, hair plastered by rain, eyes blazing like storms over the sea. For a moment, the world shrank to only them. "You held back," she whispered. "You didn't let the beast win." Kaelin's voice was low, raw. "Because of you." Her breath caught. Her hand brushed his, tentative, trembling. He didn't pull away. Around them the people knelt, not in fear but in allegiance, not to a beggar, not to a ruin, but to their king, and above them lightning split the sky. Chapter 11. The Mask and the Fire. The storm had broken by dawn, but the world it left behind carried the silence of something unfinished. The castle's stone corridors dripped with last night's rain, shadows clinging to the arches like secrets reluctant to be washed away. Elena moved through them with a slow, deliberate pace, her skirts whispering against the cold floor. Her hands brushed the walls, fingertips trailing the cracks as though she could read the story of this place in stone. Kaelen walked beside her, though he looked less a man at her side than a shadow forged of restrained violence and memory. He had shed the rags long ago, but sometimes Elena still saw them in the edges of his movements. The slight hunch when someone's gaze lingered too long, the stillness that came from years of being unseen. Even now, dressed as a king should be, he carried silence like armor. Yet it was his eyes, always his eyes, that betrayed him. Fire smoldered in them this morning, not rage, not yet, but the kindling of something that could ignite the world if left unchecked. They had come to the council chamber, where the banners of rival houses drooped damp from the storm. Men and women already waited inside, nobles, warriors, emissaries who swore loyalty only as long as it served them. Their conversations faltered when Kaelen entered. He felt the shift like a ripple across the surface of a pond, some with fear, some with envy, a few with calculation. Elena stood just behind him, her presence quiet but undeniable. She was not a queen, not yet, but the court had already begun to whisper her name, some in awe, others in hatred. The session began with words sharpened like knives, accusations, bargains, veiled threats. Houses that once betrayed Kaelen now sought to test him, circling like wolves who had tasted blood before and wondered if they could draw it again. Kaelen did not raise his voice. He did not slam fists against the table or bare teeth in threat. Instead, He listened, stone-faced, still, until silence pressed in. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. His voice carried low, edged in iron. "You speak of debts, of rights, of what is owed, but you forget yourselves." A pause. Eyes locked on him, unease stirring. "You feast in halls built by blood that was not yours. You wear gold paid for by the taxes of those you let starve. And you dare," his voice darkened, "to stand in the presence of your Alpha and measure my worth." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Some shifted, others lowered their eyes. But one, Lord Cirith, sharp-featured and hungry-eyed, smiled as if Kaelin's words were nothing but a challenge. "It is not your worth we measure, my lord," Cirith said, voice oily, "but your leash." Gasps filled the chamber, but Cirith pressed on, leaning forward. "We all know the truth. You were broken once, cursed, a beggar hidden in shadows, powerless." His gaze flicked to Elena, lingered, too long, too bold, and now, suddenly, risen again. "But even kings can wear masks. Tell me, Alpha, do you wear a crown of iron or one of ash?" Kaelin did not move, but Elena felt the shift in him, the coil of restraint, the heat rising beneath the skin. She stepped closer, her hand brushing the inside of his arm, light as air, grounding. Her eyes found his. Not here, not yet. And Kaelin, for her, held. He exhaled, slow, his gaze never leaving Cirith, but the fire tamped down, smothered beneath a will honed in exile. Instead, he smiled. A cold, razor-thin curve of lips. "Careful, Cirith. You play with ash, and fire clings to it." The chamber stirred with unease, and though no blood spilled, something had shifted. Cirith leaned back, his smirk faltering, but not gone. The war was not of swords yet, but of words, and Kaelin had marked him. Later, when the chamber emptied and night bled back into the sky, Kaelin stood alone at the balcony. Elena found him there, the storm-washed air pulling at his hair, his shoulders heavy with the weight of unspoken fury. "You wanted to kill him," she said softly. Kaelin's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the stone rail until his knuckles paled. A wolf should not bare his throat to carrion. "You didn't," she countered. She stepped closer, her hand sliding over his, forcing his grip to ease. "You proved them wrong without spilling blood. That is strength, Kaelin, the kind they fear most." He turned then, eyes burning with that barely restrained fire. "And what of you, Elena? They saw you, they watched, they measure you as they measure me." Her breath caught, but she held his gaze. "Let them measure. Let them doubt. I am not here for their approval. I am here for you." The words hung between them, bare, undeniable. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the stone mask he wore. For the first time, he let it slip, let her see the man beneath the Alpha, the beggar, the king. Slowly he reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin as though it were something sacred. "You steady me," he murmured almost in disbelief. "When every shadow pulls, you steady me." Elena leaned into his touch, her voice a whisper. "Then let me." Their lips met, not with fire, not with frenzy, but with the weight of everything unsaid. It was a kiss forged in restraint, in need, in the promise of something that could burn brighter than kingdoms or curses. But as they pulled apart, Kaelin's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the clouds had gathered once more, heavy and dark. His voice dropped, a shadow settling back into it. "The storm has not passed, Elena. It only waits." And as the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of rain and war, Elena understood the council was only the beginning. The true test, the true fire was yet to come. Chapter 12. When the storm breaks. The night did not arrive quietly. It came with the wind, moaning through the arrow slits of the castle, carrying the smell of wet earth and distant fire. Thunder cracked low, a growl across the heavens, and though the rain had not yet fallen, the air pressed down with the weight of an oncoming storm. Elena sat alone in the library, her candle burning low. The flames shivered each time the wind breathed against the stone. Shelves loomed around her, towering walls of parchment and leather, a forest of forgotten voices. She had meant to read, some text on the lineage of rival packs, hoping to untangle alliances that might steady Kaelin's reign. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the horizon, to that thick gathering darkness. Her chest ached with a pressure she could not name. It was not just fear, not just anticipation. It was the sense, bone deep, that something was coming, something sharp enough to carve the world in two. The door creaked, and Kaelin entered. His presence filled the room the way fire fills a hearth, immediate, commanding. His shoulders carried the day's battles, not fought with steel but with words, every step weighted with restraint. Yet it was his eyes that told her everything. "They move tonight," he said simply. Elena's breath caught. "Sereth?" Kaelin nodded once. I smelled the steel on his men before the council broke. They slink in the shadows, thinking me blind. His mouth curled in something between anger and grim amusement. They forget. I was beggar once. Shadows are where I lived. He moved closer, lowering his voice. He means to strike before dawn, to unseat me before I root myself too deep, to remind the kingdom that fire can be snuffed out as easily as it is lit. "And what will you do?" Elena asked, her hand tightening around the edge of the table, though her voice remained calm. Kaelin studied her for a long moment. His silence was its own language, one of burden and choice. Finally he said, "I will not wait for him to choose the hour. I will go to him." Elena rose quickly, heart hammering. "Alone?" His jaw flexed, that dangerous fire kindling again in his gaze. A king does not wait in his hall while carrion pecks at his walls. A wolf does not cower from another's growl. He answers it. Something inside her trembled at his words, not from fear of Kaelin, but from the raw truth of who he was. He could no more be contained than the storm outside. He was the storm. His eyes softened, barely, fleetingly. He brushed his hand against hers, fingers rough, touch tender. "If Sereth's men see you at my side, they will mark you, target you, and I—" His voice cut, harsh, before he could soften it. "I cannot bear that." Elena's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin, meeting him head-on. "And if they strike here, thinking you gone, am I safer within these walls while daggers creep through the halls?" Kaelin stilled. The truth in her words was a blade neither of them could turn aside. At last he exhaled, shaking his head as though conceding to something inevitable. "Very well. But stay at my back. Do not falter. Do not break." Her answer was steady, iron beneath the softness. "I will not." The rain began as they moved into the courtyard, cloaks pulled against the lash of wind. Torches hissed as water struck flame, sputtering light across the wet stones. Warriors loyal to Kaelin, scarred men, sharp-eyed women, bound by exile as much as by blood, waited for his word. No speeches, no rallying cries. Kaelin met their eyes one by one, gave a single nod, and they followed. That was enough, for an Alpha's command lived not in words, but in the unshakable force of his will. They left the safety of stone and fire, slipping into the rain-slicked night. The forest beyond the castle walls breathed with shadows, branches clawing at the sky like hands reaching for mercy. The storm thickened, thunder rolling, lightning ripping open the heavens, and in the heart of that wild night, Sereth waited. They found his men first, lurking at the ruins of an old watchtower, blades glinting faint under lightning. Caelin's warriors clashed with them, in silence broken only by steel, and the low growls of wolves not yet shifted. Elena stayed close, heart pounding, her fingers clenched tight around the dagger Caelin had pressed into her palm. The fight was brutal, rain turning the ground to mud, lightning casting every motion in sharp relief. Caelin cut through them like the storm itself, his movements precise, lethal, unstoppable. Yet his fury was restrained, his blades striking not wild but with purpose. Then came the voice, smooth, mocking, from the shadows of the tower. "You bleed yourself for a throne of ghosts, Caelin." Sereth stepped forward, torchlight revealing the cruel curve of his mouth, the ambition gleaming in his eyes. He carried no crown, no mark of Alpha, but he bore himself as though the world already belonged to him. Caelin turned to face him, shoulders squared, fire flashing behind his gaze. "Better a throne of ghosts than a throne of cowards." Sereth laughed, a sound sharp as breaking glass. "We shall see." And with that, the storm broke in full. Sereth's men surged, Caelin's answered. Steel met steel, claw met claw. Elena stood with the women of Caelin's guard, her blade flashing in the rain, breath ragged but steady. She felt the heat of Caelin's presence even when she could not see him, his shadow cutting a path through the chaos. Lightning tore open the sky above, and in its light she saw them, Caelin and Sereth circling, the world narrowing until nothing else existed. Alpha against rival, fire against ash, crown against carrion. And Elena knew, whatever the outcome, this night would mark the kingdom forever. Chapter 13. The Crown in the Storm. The storm had reached its crescendo. Lightning fractured the sky, tearing heaven's veil apart, and thunder roared like the drums of war. Rain lashed down in torrents, soaking cloak, skin, and steel alike, until every breath tasted of water and iron. Elena could barely keep her footing in the mud, every muscle trembling with effort as she slashed and parried, her dagger slick in her palm. All around her, Caelin's loyalists clashed with Sereth's insurgents, shadows colliding, breaking apart, then colliding again, each strike echoing through the storm. The scent of blood mingled with wet earth, primal and sharp, yet her eyes never strayed far from where Caelin and Sereth faced one another. Two wolves, two kings, one born from the ashes of betrayal, one risen from the gutters of ruin. Caelin's silhouette was fire forged in flesh, tall, unyielding, his every motion cut from instinct, sharpened by suffering. Sereth was a blade of a different kind, smooth, serpentine, his movements sly where Caelin's were fierce, his strikes angled to slip between defenses, not smash through them. Every time their blades met, the storm seemed to shudder with the force. Sparks leapt, rain hissed against steel. And though the men who fought around them were many, the battle itself orbited only these two. Everything else was noise. "Elena!" She spun at the shout. It was Maren, the older huntress who had sworn herself to Caelin after exile. Her braid was torn loose, her face streaked with blood and rain. She hurled another blade into the chest of a charging soldier, then reached for Elena's arm. "You must fall back!" Maren's voice was ragged but sharp with command. "If Caelin falls, they will come for you first. You're the mark that seals his crown." Elena's chest heaved, her dagger trembling in her grip. "I will not leave him." Maren's eyes searched hers, fierce and almost desperate. Then she gave a grim nod. "Then stand, but stand wisely," and with that she turned back into the fray, vanishing into the clash of shadows. Elena steadied her breath, forced her body to stillness. She would not falter, she would not break. Kaelin's words echoed in her bones. Kaelin's blade caught Sereth's across the wrist, slicing deep. Sereth snarled, stumbling back. His eyes burned like coals, but it was not pain that twisted his face, it was fury. "You think they will follow you?" Sereth spat, blood mixing with rain. "You, who begged scraps in alleyways, who wore rags when others bore the moon's mark." Kaelin's jaw tightened, fire flaring in his gaze. His voice rolled through the storm like thunder. "Yes, because I know what it is to bleed without being seen, to suffer without being saved. I am no gilded Alpha. I am the Alpha who rose from the mud, and they," he gestured to his warriors, to Elena, to every soul who had dared hope again, "they are mine because I never abandoned them." Sereth lunged, blade flashing, teeth bared in a wolf's snarl. Kaelin met him head-on, their clash striking sparks brighter than lightning. Steel shrieked. Blades slid. Sereth twisted, his strike grazing Kaelin's shoulder. Kaelin answered with a brutal kick that sent Sereth sprawling into the mud. The rival Alpha tried to rise, but Kaelin was already there, pressing his blade to Sereth's throat. The rain slowed, for just a heartbeat. The world seemed to hold its breath. Around them the fighting stuttered to stillness. Men froze mid-blow, their eyes dragged to the center where kings collided. Kaelin's voice was low, cutting, each word weighted with iron. "You betrayed me once. You stole my throne, my name, my pack, but you will not take her. You will not take them. And you will not take this kingdom." Sereth's lips curled. "Then finish it." The moment stretched, fragile as glass. And Kaelin did not break it with blood. Instead, he pulled the blade back, his voice resounding like the storm itself. "No, you will live, you will crawl. You will watch the crown you coveted burn brighter in my hands than it ever could in yours, and you will never rise again." Gasps rippled through the field. The mercy was sharper than death, the humiliation deeper than any wound. Sereth's men faltered, their fight crumbling like ash in rain. Kaelin turned from his rival, his fire claiming the storm, and Elena's breath broke in her chest, not from fear, but from the fierce, overwhelming truth of him. This was no beggar, no shadowed exile. This was the king the moon had chosen. By dawn, the battle was done. Sereth's men scattered, broken. The rain had washed the blood from the stones, leaving only the scars of steel and fire. Kaelin stood before the remnants of his people, the stormlight fading behind him. His voice carried across the courtyard, raw but steady. "We are not bound by the past, not by curses, nor by thrones stolen. We are bound by what we choose now. And I—" He glanced to Elena, his fire softening, warming. "I choose to build something that cannot be stolen." A murmur rose, then grew, then thundered into the roar of wolves lifting their voices together. And in that sound, in that howl carried to the heavens, Elena felt the curse that had shackled Kaelin crack, splinter, and finally shatter. That night, when silence at last fell over the castle, Kaelin found her where the moonlight touched the stones. He drew her close, his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "You saw me when I was nothing," he whispered, "and because of you, I am everything." Elena's tears caught the moonlight. Her voice trembled, but her hands did not as they held him. "And I would choose you, in rags or in crowns. Always." The kiss that followed was not of fire alone, but of promise, not of storm, but of dawn, for the beggar had risen. The king had awakened, and love, like crowns, had demanded sacrifice. But it had also given them something greater, everything. Epilogue, the crown in dawnlight. The storm had passed. Morning stretched soft and golden across the land, sunlight filtering through broken clouds to kiss the wet stones of the courtyard where shadows had once ruled. The banners that fluttered now bore no sigil of conquest or tyranny, but the rising wolf of Caelen's bloodline, a symbol reborn, no longer tainted by betrayal. Elena stood at the edge of the balcony, her fingers resting lightly on the worn stone rail. Below, villagers and warriors alike moved through the square, repairing, rebuilding, laughing even in exhaustion. Children splashed in shallow puddles where blood had washed away. Life, fragile and persistent, bloomed again. Caelen stepped beside her, his presence a warmth that chased the lingering chill of storm from her bones. He no longer wore the rags of exile. A cloak of dark velvet draped his shoulders, but his eyes, the fire in them, remained unchanged. The beggar's gaze, sharpened by suffering, softened only by love. "They look at me as if I were a ghost returned," he murmured, his voice low, threaded with wonder and weight. "You were a ghost," Elena said gently, turning her eyes to him. "But ghosts don't bleed. Ghosts don't rise. You lived when the world wanted you to vanish, Caelen, and now—" She touched his hand, steady, sure. "Now you're theirs again." He caught her fingers, pressing them to his lips. "Not just theirs, yours." Silence stretched between them, not empty but full, the kind of silence that hummed with belonging. Weeks passed, the castle filled with life once more, candles in the windows, laughter in the halls, footsteps echoing where dust had long lain undisturbed. Maren drilled young wolves in the courtyard, her barked orders softened by the pride in her eyes. Garrick, Caelen's scarred old mentor, spent his evenings teaching the children stories of the moon and its kings. Even the broken walls seemed to heal stone by stone beneath the hands of people who believed again. But not all scars mended unseen. Sereth lived as Caelen had commanded. Stripped of title, stripped of power, forced into exile in the very alleys where Caelen had once suffered. Rumours spread of him wandering in tattered cloaks, of his voice echoing in empty taverns, always speaking of crowns lost. Some whispered he plotted still. Others said he was broken, a shadow of the Alpha he had been. Caelen never spoke of him. But in the quiet hours, Elena sometimes saw the storm flicker again in his eyes. A reminder that peace was fragile, and shadows never truly vanished. One evening, beneath the silver moon, Elena found herself wandering the old cathedral ruins outside the city, the place where she had first seen him not as a beggar, but as something more. The air smelled of stone and rain, as if memory itself lingered in the cracks. Caelen joined her there, silent at first, standing where once he had begged. His hand brushed the pillar where his curse had chained him in darkness. "It began here," he said, voice low. "And yet, I feel it's not the end." Elena turned to him, the moonlight catching her face. "Stories like yours never end, Caelen. They carry on in those who tell them, in those who live them." She stepped close, laying her palm flat against his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. "And in us." He covered her hand with his, the weight of his crownless truth anchoring him. "Then let it be so. Whatever storms come, we face them. Together." Their kiss was softer than the ones forged in battle. Not fire, not desperation, but a quiet vow woven into eternity. From the shadows of exile to the light of dawn, the beggar had risen. The king had awakened, and though love had demanded sacrifice, it had also built something unbreakable, a kingdom reborn, a bond eternal, a story that would echo beneath moon and storm for generations to come. And for those listening, for those who believe in love even when shrouded in darkness, the tale was not only Kaelin's, it was a promise that even in rags crowns wait, that even in ruin love rises.